Hi, good morning, and welcome to the ZP FoodSense webinar. So we like to do this FoodSense webinar once a week, and it's really a kind of answering technical questions that have come in on FoodSense during the week. I'll jump straight into it. So today we're talking about FoodSense. I have one in my hand actually, which is for the testing of today. It's for the testing of chili products. It tests capsaicin. It's also testing of ginger products because it can test ginger oils. And it's also for the total antioxidative capacity of foods, which can be a predictor of shelf life and also back up kind of claims regarding antioxidants. Anyway, that said, I'll go forward very quickly. So this is the FoodSense. Today we're asking some specific questions that have come in from some colleagues in Asia. The workflow at FoodSense is you have some sensors. So these are the kind of sensors that you have. This is a row of sensors here. We have the meter itself. We have the app. We have when the sample goes on the sensor, the results actually go to the app, and the app actually uploads them to the cloud. So somebody gets an answer there and then on their phone, and I'll bring that up today. That with FoodSense Generation 4, which is the product that we now support, then you can have the app on your Android system or your Apple phone, and you'll get the result there and then on your phone. But it also sends the results up to the cloud as well. This is really important because the questions that come in today really are primarily about dilution. That if you get an unknown sample, how do you know what dilution to use? This fundamental question of dilution comes down to a fundamental property of capsaicin. Capsaicin is not a terribly soluble molecule. It's soluble in aqueous systems, or aqueous solutions I should say. Aqueous solutions is a sort of fancy way of saying water. It's poorly soluble actually in water. It's only the fats and oils that help with the solubility. So the solubility in water, if you try to just dissolve pure capsaicin into water, is about 500 Scoville heat units, and I will discuss that again today. So the Generation 4 is interesting because it actually guides people to the correct dilution. Generation 3 did not guide people to the correct dilution. So people are kind of, we realized after a while that people were needing more guidance on the correct dilution to use with the Generation 3. And on Generation 4, you don't, the product will actually guide you to that dilution. The nice thing about the Generation 4 product as well is that today really is in part helping somebody to troubleshoot or somebody to understand their data. But because they're on a Generation 3, we can't see any raw signal. So it's very hard to actually support and guide because the fundamental scientific piece of information we need is our raw signal, and we don't have it because they're on a Generation 3. The nice thing about the Generation 4 is that you can have a really easy life. You can just get the results to your smartphone and you essentially don't have to worry anything else, let's say. But then when you're trying to support people, it will put the app will send the data to the cloud, and then you can actually share that in the cloud. You don't need to download data or email data. You can just invite people like myself to actually look at the data then and actually support. So I am supporting, for example, we did a webinar on Sunday, and there I was definitely supporting a client in India. It also has an API, an application program interface, which means that this plugs into modern quality systems. The questions that have come in is the dilution ratio. How do I know exactly the appropriate dilution I should measure? So that's the question. That's the first question. How do they know? And I'm going to talk to you in a minute about that. The FoodSense Generation 4 guides you in towards it because they're worried that otherwise they're kind of wasting buffers and they're wasting materials. Just on cost, I just want to they're kind of worried about two aspects really. There's some buffer here and there's some sensors here. Just on sensors, the sensors are just halved in price. So in fact, every sensor is just halved in price. And now the reason that's happening is because the FoodSense Generation 4 is really, rocketing in sales, which means our manufacturing volumes have increased, which means now that we've actually halved the price of these sensors. So some of your concerns just went half away. So sensors get cheaper and buffers get cheaper the more people use it. Now, your first part of your question is how do I know the exact appropriate dilution? Should I determine it? and how should I determine it? The app will guide you, and I will talk about that in a minute. So on FoodSense Generation 3, you really didn't know whether you were what's called under-diluted or over-diluted, or therefore you were saturated, or you were just too weak. FoodSense Generation 4 will guide you towards that. And also then they're sort of, in order to determine if the data is appropriate, I think if the data is correct, do they have to do an organoleptic test, or do they have to do a HPLC test? Organoleptic tasting is not an objective way of measuring capsaicin. I said at the beginning that FoodSense Generation 4 is really for traceability in the supply chain. So if you want to defend your product, you're in a supply chain and the vendor say, no, it's hotter than before. Organoleptic testing, either tasting, is not an objective way of actually being able to defend that supply chain or defend your product. You have to make an objective measurement. So organoleptic testing, as a body of evidence, I would say is very weak. There's no way that you can, it's very hard to quantify it. You'd have to do it with a large body of people. I mean, just out of interest, I'm not going to go there now about Wilbur Scoville. HPLC, no, we're actually finding ourselves now to be more reliable, I would suggest, than HPLC. HPLC is a complete black box. You take a sample, you send it out to a lab, you get a result back, and you have no transparency on that result. FoodSense Generation 4 is very transparent, and I'll emphasize that today, because you get the raw data. You can always confirm. So when you've done HPLC, you get a certificate of analysis. You very little insight into what went on behind that number. You just have to believe that Scoville heat unit that came from HPLC. So I wouldn't describe HPLC as necessarily reliant in terms of transparency, whereas you'll see this product is actually extremely transparent. You can see all the workings behind actually that Scoville heat unit that you then eventually get. So I would say no to question number 2. Question number 3 is interesting, see, because really what's happening here is they've got a Generation 3 product, and actually ZP now only supports Generation 4. We've gone to Generation 4 because we could see that we needed to give more guidance on dilution, and we needed to be able to really support people. Sometimes we need to see the raw signal. The first thing I noticed here, see, is that I have answered this question before, but now they give me some more interesting information. They tested a red powder, and it came back at 3,405 and 3,665 Scoville heat units, and it only differed by 250 Scoville heat units. So I said, these two products are essentially the same, and they say, well, we've done some organoleptic testing, which is really hard, because how do you organoleptic testing? You can make a sort of statement, we did organoleptic testing, but there's no extra evidence behind that. It's just a group of people giving an opinion. But that said, they've got the opinion. But what I suggest is that red powder suggests that it's possibly it could actually be quite a lot of chili powder in there. And chili powders, we've got customers doing chili powders. If the chili powder is mild, they're doing 1 in 100 dilution. If it's a bit more medium, it's 1 in 1,000. And we've got one customer who's been doing it 1 in 10,000. So this 1 in 9, I think you're just dealing with saturated solutions now. Now I realize this is just saturated. Now, you're on FoodSense Generation 3, so I can't confirm that. I can only give you an opinion, because if you were FoodSense Generation 4, I would say, well, first of all, the app would tell you that it was saturated. And then secondly, we could see the raw data in the cloud, and we'd be able to say it's just saturated. So you're looking at, essentially, now you give me extra information. You tell me it's a red powder. Red powder sounds an awful lot like a chili powder. Chili powders, people are doing either 1 in 100 dilutions, 1 in 1,000, or 1 in 10,000. And I'll give you an example today of how we actually get to those different dilutions. They're also dealing with possibly some sort of spicy sauce, but they're doing 1 in 4 dilution. Just out of interest, the FoodSense Generation 4 doesn't give you the option to do 1 in 4 dilution. So 1 in 4, we've learned over the years. Now we actually don't even suggest 1 in 4. So, and I think we haven't done that for over a year. but you must be using a FoodSense. Yeah, you're on a FoodSense Generation 3. Just out of interest, we do these webinars every week. So if you're interested in staying kind of current with FoodSense Generation 4 and the science of, let's say, testing of chili products, which is primarily capsaicin, then please come to these webinars. Question number 4 is really about Generation 4 versus Generation 3. I'll go through the differences between the two products today, but they're also asking, are the sensors between Generation 3 and Generation 4 compatible? So I'm just going to hold up this and say, this is what a Generation 4 sensor looks like. It's not, your Generation 3 sensors do not have the same shape and form factor as the Generation 4. The Generation, this is the meter. It's very specially shaped so that this sensor can actually fit in there. So the quick answer is Generation 3 sensors are not compatible with Generation 4 sensors. Generation 3 sensors are not compatible with Generation 4 meters. And then the buffer has also changed. So you can't bring the Generation 3. We've made some improvements. This buffer, which is Generation 4, is not... you can't bring Generation 3 buffer across. So the quick answer to that question is no. So there's, I am going to run through the differences between these two products shortly. So they look, they obviously look quite different. The Generation 3 was out for a while, but it's like a car or like a phone. You learn from experience. You try to improve, the customer experience, and so we put quite a bit of effort into improving. I'd actually suggest improving the accuracy, but it's really improving the accuracy by guiding the customer and sort of reducing, let's say, customer errors. You can improve accuracy fundamentally by making technologies better, but actually just by making the customer journey a little bit better as well. So we have transitioned away from Generation 3. In fact, we don't sell Generation 3 anymore, and we have definitely gone to Generation 4 products. So Generation 3, there's things that are sort of mechanically different. Like with Generation 4, there are no slots. We always used to find those slots quite awkward when people try to put sensors in there. Putting a sensor in this one is actually quite easy. There's no slotting. You just place them on and click it up. Just as a quick, and those slots would also mean that you sometimes would get ingression of liquid, which is an absolute disaster. Just out of interest, there's a nice little feature on this as well, that if this gets chili sauce or chili powder on it, you can just take it apart and clean it, and then it just clicks back together. So there's some mechanical improvements. When you look at the questions coming from this particular client, one of the, let's say, things that's going on is that there's no guidance on dilution. They're kind of saying, well, how do I know what dilution to use? Well, with Generation 4, you... first of all, you have fixed dilutions. So you can either choose 1 in 10, 1 in 100, 1 in 1,000, 1 in 10,000. So there's less ambiguity about what dilution to actually use. There's no intelligence on dilution. So with FoodSense Generation 3, it would give you, the app will give you no feedback on whether you're at the right dilution. FoodSense Generation 4 will give you feedback. It will give you too high or too low. So too high means that what you've tried to measure is at too high a concentration for the measurement. And if you over dilute, then it will give you too low. So it means that you've over diluted. Now, FoodSense Generation 3 never gave you that feedback. So you wouldn't realize that you were either too dilute or too concentrated. But we saw that and we've decided to fix it. On FoodSense Generation 3, it's only worked with Apple. On FoodSense Generation 4, it works with Apple and Android. Now, what's important is with FoodSense Generation 3, there is no cloud compatibility. So none of the raw signal was ever saved. But now, with FoodSense Generation 4, all the raw signals are saved automatically to the cloud. And that means that you can check the you can check the data. it means it's easier for us to support. So when we're trying to support FoodSense Generation 3, we can give opinion, but we can't see the raw signal. So it's very hard for us to support. And we realized that. And so when we did FoodSense Generation 4, we made sure that all the raw data goes to the cloud. So now we can support because it's easy to share that data with us. And the fact that we have all the raw data gives us traceability. So if you're using the product to, in the supply chain, you can always defend the results that you are telling your other people in the supply chain, because actually we have all the raw data and it's very traceable. So we have a very intelligent guided dilution, and you'll see this if anyone knows this guy. This gentleman is called Ed Curry. He's the holder of the Guinness World Records, or the Guinness World Record book entry for the hottest chili in the world, Pepper X, and he held a previous record as well for the Carolina Reaper. This is one of his products, the Apollo, Last Dab Apollo. So if you take this product and you do a 1 in 10 dilution, the app will say too high. So the app is telling you that's too high. If you do a 1 in 100, it'll tell you it's too high, and if you do 1 in 1000, it'll give you a result. So you can see that you're no longer trying to guess. You can go it. You could sequentially, so this would suggest that you have to go through, 1, 2, and on the third test you get the result right. But what's interesting about the questioner that's asking the questions in today's webinar is, I have a very, very strong suspicion actually that the only test they have is organoleptic, and they have no HPLC. So in fact, they're almost like, very much at the start of their journey, because in fact, I don't think they, which is fine. You don't need HPLC organoleptic testing, but it's therefore reasonable that you've got a completely unknown product. In order to kind of even, characterize that product, you may have to do, 1 in 10, too high, 1 in 100, too high, 1 in 1000, it's fine. I will also show you a shortcut method, but I'm just showing you that we do have intelligent guided dilution on Generation 4, which we never had on Generation 3. So that never had it, but this product, Generation 4, definitely does have it. This is the shortcut, it's cloud connectivity. So if you get something like it says too high, you can actually share it or look at it yourself. And I can look at that data, and it gives me a full transparency. It tells me when it happened. It'll actually tell me what dilution you used, and I will see the raw signal. So I'll be able to see the raw signal and what dilution you use. And you can choose, and by looking at the data, see that I can see immediately this is too high, because I draw sort of a line along here. I can see that this is really too high, and we could just immediately suggest go to the next dilution. So if it was really high, we may say don't go 1 dilution, go 2 dilutions. So if you do 1 in 10, it's really, really high. Then you can look at the raw data and say, I'm going to skip the 1 in 100 and just go straight to the 1 in 1000. So you get guided to the right dilution because the app will give you feedback. And if you want to skip the sequential steps in that guidance, you can actually just look at the raw signal. And then you can, and at the moment, see, I'm being asked to support when I'm blinded because they're on FoodSense Generation 3. I could actually look at the raw data and actually just give them guidance. And I do that every week. We're doing webinars where we're anonymizing the answers, but we are giving people support through anonymized answers through our website, because they choose to share the data with me. I can look at the raw signal and advise them accordingly. So in summary, a lot of these questions on this FoodSense or today are because somebody's on a FoodSense Generation 3. They've got very little transparency, but FoodSense Generation 4 gives guided dilution. It offers you only 4 dilutions, 1 in 10, 1 in 100, 1 in 1000, and 1 in 10,000. It has smart feedback. It will tell you if it's too high or too low. So too high is too concentrated, and too low is you're over diluted. And if it's right, it'll give you a result. And also there's the cloud. So if it's too high, for example, this is too high because I can actually see that it's very big signals, and the signal's even cut off here. So that tells me it's too high. Or if it's too low, I can just see the signal is very flat here. So guided dilution, smart feedback, and the cloud actually really helps us guide you to the dilution much more efficiently. I mean, with FoodSense Generation 3, none of this was there. This is all new for FoodSense Generation 4. There's a fundamental reason why we do dilution, so I'm going to talk about the fundamental reason. capsaicin is poorly soluble in water. Capsaicin is and dihydrocapsaicin similar. They are organic molecules. They are not terribly soluble in water. In fact, their solubility is about, limit of solubility is about 500 Scoville heat units. Now, you obviously can have products much hotter than this. It's because the oils and the fats in those products allow capsaicin to dissolve. But otherwise, capsaicin is poorly soluble. So what does this mean then? If you think your sample is 0 to 5,000, then you do a 1 in 10 dilution. You don't have any choice, by the way. It will do a 1 in 10 dilution. By that, I mean, we only offer 1 in 10 dilution, or 1 in 100, or 1 in 1,000, or 1 in 10,000. So it's a 5,000 Scoville heat units. You divide by 10, you get to 500. So you can see the mathematics here. If we think you're 0 to 5,000, then we will just suggest. But now, this person doesn't know, by the way, because I understand that actually there is no HPLC testing going on, and otherwise they're just doing organoleptic testing, or basically taste testing. So, first of all, I think a few of the things they're doing is that spicy sauce, which is saying 800. I suspect it's just saturated, and I also think that red powder is actually chili powder, and again, you're oversaturated. But if you do have a sense of how hot your product is, if it's like a Tabasco sauce or a mild chili sauce, then you probably need to be doing 1 in 10 dilution. If it's a medium chili sauce, and we do have examples of medium chili sauces, then that may be in the range 5,000 to 50,000. Or if it's a mild chili powder, they seem to be about 50,000 Scoville heat units. Then you do a 1 in 100 dilution. If you take 50,000 divided by 100, you get 500 Scoville heat units. If it's a hotter chili powder or a hot chili sauce, then you're definitely in the sort of 50,000 to 500,000. Then you do a 1 in 1,000 dilution. If you take 500,000 divided by 1,000, you get 500 Scoville heat units. You can see the rule here, the 500 Scoville heat unit rule. If you're really hot, and I can only think, I can think of a customer who's pretty hot. They're doing Carolina Reaper powder. Then you're 500,000 to 5 million. By the way, most natural products tap out at 5 million. Oh, not tap out at 5 million, really tap out at possibly up to 3 million. I understand that capsaicin itself is 16 million. But, 16 million Scoville heat units is kind of weaponized. It's only something the military would be using. So 500,000 to 5 million, then you do a 1 in 10,000 dilution. Because if you take 5 million and you divide it by 10,000, take 5 million, divide by 10,000, you get 500 Scoville heat units. So that's our kind of rule. And if you get stuck, then if you're a FoodSense Generation 4, it's easy to help you, because every time you do a result, the data gets uploaded, and then you can choose to share it with us, and actually we can then guide you. But if you're on FoodSense Generation 3, then it's really hard to help. It's probably just worth saying that this is somebody who's testing some red powders in India, and they're definitely doing 1 in 1,000 dilution. So we've been supporting these people since probably about September last year in our weekly webinars. When I say supporting, just answering questions, because on FoodSense Generation 4, it's much easier to support them. We've been helping somebody with Carolina Reapers, and with their Carolina Reapers, they're very hot. I suppose I clicked over that rather quickly. Carolina Reaper does have the reputation of Carolina Reaper powders. I need to really say that very clearly, because I'm not going to get into dry weight versus wet weight today, but Carolina Reaper powder, its dry weight Scoville heat unit is about 2.2 million, or can be about 2.2 million. So if you're testing hot powders, you have a choice of 1 in 100, 1 in 10, but it's really not going to work. 1 in 100 is not going to work, 1 in 1,000 not going to work, and 1 in 10,000. So we took the Carolina Reaper, we did 1 in 10, too high, which means more dilution. Do 1 in 100, the app says too high, which means more dilution. If you do 1 in 1,000, it says too high, more dilution, and then it'll actually give a result in the 1 in 10,000. So if you're really if this is the first time you're objectively measuring your product, then you may have to do a few tests in order to kind of understand where you're at on the landscape. Now, these sensors have just halved in price. So in fact, this now becomes even much lower cost than HPLC testing. And if you really factor in, when you get people to, if you get a panel of people and they all have to test this, A, it's not objective, and B, it's quite expensive if you really consider the salaries of the people doing all of that work. So, problem of dilution. How do I know exactly the appropriate dilution ratio, and how should I determine it? Well, you get, first of all you've been doing 1 in 4. We understand that's historical. We did used to advise it, but now with time, I think we're 5 years in at this point. We now suggest that you don't ever do 1 in 4, and there's a very guided experience in terms of, if it's too high, it will tell you it's too high. If it's too low, it will tell you it's too low. So you can actually change. They're doing. Do you need to do organoleptic testing every time to confirm the food sense? No, you don't. Because you're on FoodSense Generation 3, I find it quite hard to support you. So therefore, you're kind of, I'm blind, you're blind, and I think you need to come up to FoodSense Generation 4. FoodSense Generation 3 is what you're using. This red powder sounds suspiciously like it's got quite a lot of chili powder in it. You've got these two answers that are very similar to one another. But you say that when you taste it, one's hotter than the other, which makes me think that actually it's under diluted. And I've suggested that people using chili powders are doing higher dilutions than this. And then you're also testing a hot chili sauce, which is, you're doing a 4-fold dilution, but it's probably going to have to be a 1 in 10 dilution as well. It's very hard to, if the customer is only relying on taste as their guidance, then you can't defend against that. You can't say, well, it tastes different. I've had this. We're objectively measuring the capsaicin, objectively measuring the hotness, and then you're with somebody and they say, oh, that tastes hotter. Seriously, I mean, it may not taste hotter to me, and it may not taste hotter to the guy down the road. That's an opinion. It's not the same as scientific evidence. But as it is, 1 in 4 dilution no longer exists. We only do 1 in 10 dilution. And if I was trying to really defend this, I could actually look at the raw data on FoodSense Generation 4 and actually prove the point. I could actually look at the capsaicin molecules and say, this is the capsaicin molecules. This is the truth. Or when I say look at the capsaicin molecules, look at the concentration of capsaicin molecules. And the quick answer to your question is, you can see quite physically that the sensors have quite a different shape. That shape is so that we can actually just click the sensor in quite readily. And there is no, the buffers between FoodSense Generation 3 and FoodSense Generation 4 did change, so you can't carry them across. Yeah, so no more slots on the FoodSense Generation 4. FoodSense Generation 3, no guidance on dilution. FoodSense Generation 4, it fixes the dilutions that you can use. There's no intelligence on FoodSense Generation 3 on dilution, but FoodSense Generation 4 will give you feedback on the app, too high, too low, or give you results. FoodSense Generation 4 works with Apple and Android. And then this lack of cloud capability on FoodSense Generation 3 was something that we really needed to fix, because we help clients all around the world. We help them through them sharing their data with us. We anonymize the response, but then we're able to kind of guide them through webinars like this, but we always anonymize the results, because that allows us to check the data, gives us support, and it also gives them traceability as well. So if you've got any questions regarding FoodSense Generation 4, today I've talked quite heavily about the testing of chili products. You can see that this is really taking a very scientific approach to this. So if your only method of quality control or quality assurance today is organoleptic or tasting, then it's definitely your prerogative to do that, but it's not objective, and FoodSense Generation 4 is an objective measurement to do this. Okay, if you've got any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. Okay, thanks very much.